Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Citizens Forum. Citizens Forum is a new show. This is our first week. We're filming it on Tuesday, October 23rd at our community television station in the Memorial Arena with 2 volunteer camera people and some great staff from Shaw. Thank you very much. So, Citizens Forum. The first part of this program, what we're going to be talking about is environmental issues, social issues, political issues, economic issues, and hopefully whatever, who knows what's going to come up. The first part of this show is called the Walter and Jack Show. And Walter McGinnis and myself, Jack Etkin, are going to hopefully entertain you and maybe even inform you about some of the issues of the day as we see them from our points of view, which is not the same point of view that you may usually see on television, hear on the radio, or read in the newspapers. So we're going to talk about a few different things today, and the first thing I want to talk about is the deficit. I think anybody who follows political issues in British Columbia has heard many times that we have a big deficit. And because of the deficit, the government has no money. And because the government has no money, they have to, well, people have to wait to get operations, surgeries. Often people wait for long times in great pain for these procedures. People have to get treated in hallways in our emergency rooms because there's no money. There's no money for public schools, or not enough money for public schools. There's not enough money for seniors. We all know what happened with them over the past couple of years. So that's the deficit story we're told. But what I want to tell you is that really there is no deficit. What we have in British Columbia really is tax cuts. The Liberal government, since they came to power in 2001, have cut taxes significantly, and those taxes have gone mostly to the people at the very top, the highest income earners, and the biggest corporations and businesses in the province. And right now, compared to 2001, those tax cuts are costing us between $3.5 to $6 or $7 billion a year. People get different numbers when they play around with them, and when you do, I don't know how some of those numbers are gotten, but the numbers I've seen are from $3.5 to $7 billion a year. If we had kept the tax structure we had in 2001, which was the last year of the NDP government, which wasn't a terrible tax structure, the government would have now, let's say $4 billion a year extra. And so when you hear that there's no money for schools, and when you hear that there's no money for hospitals, and when you hear that there's no money for public sector workers, often people making $14, $15, $16, $17 an hour, remember that that money is being taken from these people, really, and from these services, and being given in tax cuts to the biggest businesses and richest people in the province. So that's my take on deficits.
Well, Jack, I'd like to ask you a question. I mean, we know that tax cuts have been devastating in this province, and corporations are always going after tax cuts. You can't blame them. But we're now looking at a new era. Perhaps we're going to have a new government in British Columbia. And if we followed the polls, very likely that would be an NDP government. So do you know how the tax structure might look, or would you guess what the tax structure might look under the new NDP regime?
Well, yeah, as a matter of fact, that's a very interesting thing from my point of view, because I use the number of about $6 billion a year from the figures I've seen, and I think they've come from a very good source. I would say that compared to 2001, the tax cuts are now costing us about $6 billion a year. The NDP is saying, I think, that if they're elected, they're going to raise taxes, but they're only going to raise them on certain things, and they're going to take in an extra $350 million a year. So what we're seeing is a reduction over the last 10 or 11 years of $6 billion. And the NDP is coming in and saying, we're going to raise taxes. And they're looking very good to people by saying that. But they're only going to raise them by about $350 million. So maybe 6 to 7%.
Right.
So that's what happens. We reduce by a very large amount. The NDP comes in and raises them 6 to 7%. You know, you can see the problem in terms of revenue. And then the NDP is going to say there's still not enough money for everything, which there won't be.
Right. Same old story in many
Same old
ways.
story. So, I mean, that to me, that's an important issue. Now, the way the Walter and Jack show works is Walter's turn.
Well, when Jack first invited me to come on and help him out on the show, I just immediately started writing down some notes on issues and things that I thought would be important. And some things I'm intimately involved in and working on, and other things I think that the public should be really made aware of. One thing I know that Jack's worked on a lot, and I think is very, very important, is all the issues around the Johnson Street Bridge. And I think we should be talking more about it, and I think a lot more information should come out about how the decision process occurred, what sort of information. Apparently, it seems a fair amount of information has been withheld from the mayor and council, as well as the general public, and the timeline on issues about when this information was generated. Sometimes many months, and sometimes a couple of years. In some cases, the information has been withheld. So that's a big issue. The Johnson Street Bridge. Of course, I've been working a lot on the Wi-Fi issue and electromagnetic radiation issues in general. And locally, we have the local School District 61 school board is about to make a decision on whether or not to allow Wi-Fi, that's wireless internet technology, in schools, and particularly in elementary schools. So it's a big decision on the school board. It's very, very controversial. It's really split the school board right down the middle, and there's a lot of intrigue there with a lot of large interests, with large corporate interests, and a large political agenda also around the use of Wi-Fi in schools. In the provincial realm,
Can I ask you a question about Wi-Fi?
sure.
Personally, I think it's not safe to have Wi-Fi in schools. I don't think it's safe to use a cell phone. I mean, I think there's a price to be paid for all of this. I think that's your concern about putting Wi-Fi into schools, right?
Well, the most part, there's a health issue, and the public really isn't aware of the data that shows that there's negative health effects associated with exposure, particularly to children. And we have a situation where the mainstream medical community, let's say, led by our chief medical health officer here in British Columbia, have more or less followed a certain line on health and safety that's been shown time and time again not to be scientific and not to be fact-based, and also to have, there's some huge issues around how they, what information they look at. For instance, they ignore independent studies, and they review almost entirely, almost exclusively, on industry-funded research.
So are you saying that the radiation that comes from cell phones, Wi-Fi, smart meters, which are now being put on everybody's homes, I think that's your point, isn't it? That there is a health and safety problem.
That's a big concern. I mean, it's always the overriding concern with this type of technology is how much exposure to this type of radiation is safe. And I think if you want to get more into it, I mean, the number one issue, of course, is that the Chief Medical Health Officer and the Centers for Disease Control and the BC Cancer Agency and all the others rely on a model of safety, what they call a thermal heating model. And they allow a certain amount of radiation exposure that's based upon how quickly the human body warms up from exposure to microwave radiation. Now, this is the same radiation that cooks your dinner at home. And, you know, if you put enough microwave radiation on tissue, it warms up. So the government, in their great wisdom, says, well, we're going to just let people warm up a little. And they call that, and they developed a guideline called Safety Code 6. And basically, it allows you to have your body warmed up 1 degree Celsius over a 6-minute period. Now, the problem is, and something that most of the public don't understand, is that all the concerns about cancer and Alzheimer's and autism in children, which is a huge issue now. A lot of brain diseases in general all have been associated, time and time again, been shown to be associated with exposure to, say, for instance, cell phone radiation or Wi-Fi type radiation and all that. Now, that's what's known as a biological effect. Now, biological effects occur at exposure levels thousands and thousands of times less than what it takes to heat tissue.
Now, I think from what you've shown me, I think there are not single or not dozens, not hundreds, but literally thousands of studies that show that the radiation coming from your cell phone, from Wi-Fi that's around our city, from the cell phone towers that are all over our city, this is dangerous stuff.
Precisely. I mean, always in life, we always should be prudent and take precautions. And we do that. We don't walk across the street with our eyes shut. We behave in a certain way. That's why we're still on the planet, because we have the ability to be thoughtful about what we're doing. What we're faced with right now is a barging ahead with the technology without the good, solid scientific evidence of safety. And it's very alarming, Jack. If anyone looks into that issue, it's a very, very serious issue, and particularly when you're talking about exposing children to this type of radiation.
So, folks, personally, I think that kind of radiation is a bit like smoking. We're all exposed to it, some more, some less, because you can't escape it. It's all around us. And so, as Walter said, the decision is going to be made shortly by School District number 61 about putting Wi-Fi into schools. Personally, I think they shouldn't. I'm sure a lot of people are very happy with it. The school board is split, but people should know that, you know, there is a potential risk. I mean, that's simply the fact. Then we can decide what we're going to do. And of course, the smart meters that are being put on everybody's homes, that's another source now of exposure to us. So my next topic is democracy. And of the two things that we've just talked about, I talked a bit about the deficit, and you talked a bit about, electromagnetic radiation and the amounts we're exposed to it. And I think the fact that our government sets safety standards that are far, far too high, according to what we think is the science. And I think all of those things kind of come together into, those are symptoms. And there's many, many other symptoms. The pipeline that they're building across northern BC right now, and the Enbridge one they're planning to build. You know, the fact that we have homeless on our streets, so many food banks, poverty. We've got Stephen Harper going around signing free trade deals that we know nothing about. I think it all comes down to the fact that we've lost a lot of our democracy. And we've become a nation and a province in which public opinion and what the public wants doesn't really count for much anymore. It seems to me that the corporations run the country, and the government, we elect the governments, but after they're elected, they seem to go to work for the corporations. And they're not representing our interests to the world, they're representing the corporate interests to us. And I think we can all see as we look around that this is becoming increasingly dangerous. Our entire food supply has been genetically contaminated. We've been in one war after another in the last few years. I mean, the economy of the world, it seems, is on the verge of, you know, who knows what. Our society is, you know, in some trouble. And when I look at all of it, I really think that the fundamental issue is that we don't have much democracy anymore. If we had more democracy, which means that what the people want is what the people get, and our governments kind of worked for us, making sure we're fully informed, then finding out what we want, and then doing it, I think if we could move a bit more in that direction, and we can, then this could become a much better country. Because I got a lot of faith in the people of this country, and I've got very, very little faith left in the people who run this country.
Well, you know, hey, we're in total agreement, Jack. But I think in process is to me, what's so important is having people to get re-engaged into the process. When we have a situation where Stephen Harper has a majority government in Canada, and 75% of the registered voters did not vote for him. So even with his, even removing half the voters that did not show up at the polls, he still had a very slim majority. So the thing is that I think in order to get the public re-engaged, we have to look at mechanisms and ways to get them interested again. I mean,
I think people are interested.
Well, to a certain
we're
degree.
just locked out. I mean, I know people, including myself and you, have fought not only for years but for decades on many, many issues, but we're always up against this brick wall of the government doesn't care. So you work on let's say the smart meter issue.
Yeah.
I mean, they're being put on everybody's house. Do we want this? It doesn't matter. They don't care. They don't ask us. It's happening around the world. Why is it happening? What power has determined that we here in BC are going to spend $1 billion that we don't have to spend in order to put a wireless smart meter on everybody's home in the province, whether they want it or not?
Right.
Everybody's electricity rate seems to be going up because of it, and they don't care. So this is, multiplied by 1,000. This is what's happened.
Well, I think though is that they've gotten away with it. When I've been dealing with bureaucracies over the years, I've started to realize that what looked like a huge monolithic entity that was impenetrable turned out just to be a few individuals with a very big agenda. And
usually at the top, I guess.
They're at the top. So we have to be clever. We have to get re-engaged. We have to try to figure out who's doing what. Getting access to information is vitally important. If we're going to have a democracy, we have to work at it. That's the bottom line. I think we still have a chance to turn the ship away from the rocks. We just simply have to figure out how to do it. And the options are not, either we get engaged or we're not going to survive on the planet. There's an agenda going on, obviously, and our elected representatives are not doing the job for us. So I think if we want to enter into something around democracy is look at what's happened around the Johnson Street Bridge and look at that process up close. And Focus Magazine's done some excellent work, just top-notch investigative reporting, stuff you just don't see anymore in the mainstream papers. But they've been able to dig up evidence and to show that a lot of very, very important documents that were very pertinent to the decision of whether or not to build this bridge and what type of bridge to build were not being brought forward by the city staff in an expedient manner. And I'm not sure about the timelines, but several months sometimes have passed between the time when they get the documents in their hands and when the staff.
Let me run through because I really followed Focus Magazine when they were doing this, and I got a very interesting picture of what happened. I'd like to just run through the time because I think a lot of people.
Yeah, please do.
So, I mean, the first thing that I saw was that the Johnson Street Bridge was fine. Then there was a city election. It was never discussed. After the city election in Victoria, it was suddenly realized that the bridge was in serious disrepair, in part because they had deliberately not maintained it, and now there was a problem. The first study that was done by the engineering consultants said what we should do is fix up the bridge at a cost of less than $10 million. That was the first thing that came through, and Focus Magazine actually printed the memo. It was very interesting. Within a couple of years, somehow that had gone up to, well, now we're at $90 million to build a new bridge, when the original thing was, let's fix the old bridge for less than $10 million. And what's happened, the main thing that's happened to date is that the rail bridge has disappeared. So what they've done is they have cut the rail link on the E&N from Langford into Victoria. So we can no longer have this rail system bringing people and solving the whole Colwood crawl. I mean, the track is there, and now they've cut the bridge. They've gotten rid of it. I mean, is this by accident? Do these crazy things just happen? Or is there a plan in place? Because the new plan is that we are going to spend $950 million to build a light rail system from downtown to the new Walmart Mall, and then out to the same place in Langford that we already have the track running from there to downtown. You know, you start to shake your head after a while.
Well, you know, I think the only way to turn these sort of things around, though, is trying to democratize. And I think the City of Victoria did pass some resolutions to ask staff to give their documents in a more, in a more expedient manner and all that. And I think we have to start working with what we got here, Jack. You know what I mean? So really, I think the bottom line there with this Johnson Street Bridge, I really, personally, from I look at the evidence, it looks a lot like a cover-up to me. It looks like there was an agenda for several years to build this bridge. There was some, and basically they're trying to bring this to fruition. But that decision's not completely made yet. So, if enough of the public and enough people in Victoria, really find out about the shenanigans that have gone on, it's going to make them really question whether these guys should be making these decisions for them in the first place. And when another election arrives, well, we might get a more progressive council. So I think that's how it works. So let's hope.
Yeah, let's hope. I mean, I just don't know where to go. I mean, what I'd like to see really is the rail bridge, a new rail bridge put up, because it's not the future, it's the present.
Yeah.
I mean, so let's move on to the subject of climate change. Why, when we have a track running from Langford to downtown Victoria, and we've had that track there for like a century, why has it never been used, I mean, it could have been doubled, and we could have had trains running from Langford to Victoria. This whole Colwood crawl thing, it's bedeviled the city for decades, and there's never a solution, and yet the solution has always been there. And now when it looks like maybe we'll do it, oh, the bridge is gone, Climate change is coming at us like a runaway rhinoceros. I mean,
The point is, you have to agree, though, that you can build a bridge with rail capacity. The new bridge could have rail.
Yes.
So that option is not completely removed. It's just a matter of trying to bring it forward in a way that the public can understand.
So that's actually the best option right now, is either to just put back another rail bridge and fix up the old bridge, which, if it can still be done.
Yeah.
Or build, if they're determined to build a new bridge, at least make sure it has rail on it.
Right.
Okay. Any last issue? We got 2 minutes left. Less than 2 minutes.
Well, look, the big provincial issue, I mean, the Enbridge pipeline, we're going to have to talk about that another time, but when it comes around to smart meters, I just phoned up Chris Anderson in Salt Spring, and just this week, Corex has arrived with 30 trucks on an invasion of Salt Spring.
Now, Corex is the company that's putting in
Correct.
the smart meter. So they're invading Salt Spring Island as we speak on October 23rd.
30 trucks, 30 crews over there trying to put these meters in. The reports are there's 1,000 meters that have been locked with an actual clamp around the meter.
You mean people at their homes have locked their homes off so they can't do it?
Well, they've locked the meter.
Yeah, locked their meters.
So they protected it from hydro.
Yeah.
A lot of people have signs up. There's a lot of refusals. The thing is, you have to remember is that in British Columbia, 59 municipalities have asked the provincial government, have passed resolutions and motions in their councils to ask the provincial government to have a moratorium on the smart meter program. That represents over 2 million people in British Columbia. There's a massive resistance to the smart meter program, no matter what anybody's telling you, no matter what the media is reporting. There's a huge groundswell of resentment against this program. And as you say, democracy is a thing we have to be doing, and there was no fair process in deciding. The Clean Energy Act was passed in the legislature without one word of debate on it, and the smart meter was passed without one word of debate. and not one word was whispered about wireless technology. So they are trying to sneak this in around us, and the public's getting engaged, and this issue is not going to go away.
So there's two big issues. The bridge, what are we going to do about that? We have to do something smart. And speaking of smart meters, good for the people on Salt Spring. I listen to CFAX all the time. I have not heard one word about this. I read the TC. I don't know anything about this. You know, our media has got to do a better job of informing us about these very, very important issues. I mean, I hope the people on Salt Spring can stop Corex. Good for you. Keep fighting. And the rest of us hopefully will join you. And I mean, we don't need these smart meters. Walter, thank you very much. That's the first edition of the Walter and Jack Show. Maybe more to come next week. Who knows? Welcome back to part 2 of Citizens Forum, filmed in the Memorial Arena, kind of in the basement, in our community television studio with great volunteer camera people and the able assistance of Shaw's staff. Our next guest is Chris Cook, and Chris and I are going to talk about things mostly from the point of view of, I think, media. And Chris has been involved in local media for a long time, including doing the best radio interview I've ever heard quite a few years ago. So Chris, maybe you can just say a few words about you and media.
Well, thanks for having me, Jack, and especially on your inaugural program here, Citizens Forum. It's a great idea. And I got into citizens media, I guess it was about 13, 14 years now. As you say, I run a radio show out of CFUV, Guerrilla Radio, 5 p.m. every Monday afternoon. And, you know, when I started that, the idea was to provide a forum for people and issues that aren't covered in the corporate press or in the state press as well, you know. And I've been doing that for, well, ever since almost 700 shows, close to 1,500 interviews with all of the most famous people you've never heard of.
For example?
Oh, well, you know, there's some of the famous people you have heard of, you know, Noam Chomsky and Chris Hedges, Michael Parente, Vandana Shiva, Maud Barlow, Mel Hertig, a lot of Canadians, David Orchard, and you know, too many more to mention.
And as you say, these are names that most of them we don't hear too much of in the mainstream media.
Yeah, well, this was the idea of the show, was just to provide, you know, some avenue where, you know, the message that I wanted to hear on the CBC and even on the commercial stations, but I didn't hear it. I wasn't getting it, and it frustrated me. And then I thought, okay, well, I started listening to CFUV, and there was a really great program. The programmers whose name I've forgotten now, but where I was actually hearing the stuff that I knew, I knew to be true, but you didn't get on any other media forum. I thought, hey, wow, there's somebody doing something. So I got involved up there, and you know, it's been great. And then in the meantime, I've started a website, pacificfreepress.com. So I've been mostly an aggregate site, but I host my radio program there as well. Post it up, so it's available online, as a podcast. And this is a whole new media world. And when I look back to 1998 when I started out to today, the whole media landscape has changed. It's an amazing and profound difference.
Okay, so first of all, pacificfreepress.com,
right.
And your radio shows are also up there.
Yeah, I upload them to the computer, digitize them, and put them up as podcasts. So I've got a few hundred past shows up there.
Yeah.
Now, we didn't even have internet when I started this at the University of Victoria. Literally, we'd go up and get a few newspapers in the morning and sort of go through them and try to cobble our guests together from wherever. And there was a young guy up there who was in poli-sci, and he asked to use our facilities to interview Noam Chomsky. And I thought, wow, you can actually get on the phone to people, to anybody, anywhere, and it changed the whole direction of my program. Then I stopped being as local and started talking to, prominent journalists and scientists and even politicians, from Canada and beyond.
Okay, and putting out the kind of message that we don't get enough of, or we don't get any of often in the corporate media. So today is October 23rd. It's a Tuesday. Yesterday was the Monday at which the big demonstration or protest, or I don't know what to call it.
Defend Our Coast was, down at the legislature, some few thousands of people came out and came over. You know, it was organized in an and this just sort of goes to the whole media change as well. It was organized mostly online, and you know there was no advertising in newspapers that I could see here, or you know some of the media outlets might have picked it up, but they were all there. The big media, so-called, came out. You know, all the majors were there, and
to me, the most remarkable thing about the whole Enbridge pipeline story right now is that while we are all fighting Enbridge in many, many different ways, and thinking we're stopping it, at least temporarily, or at least it's not being built, there is another pipeline being built right now as we speak across northern BC, following almost exactly the same route as the Enbridge pipeline is going to follow if it's approved. And it ends at Kitimat, which is the same place where Enbridge will or will not end. It's to carry fracked natural gas from northeastern BC to Kitimat, where it's going to be liquefied at huge electrical expense to liquefy it. I mean, it's a massive project, and then shipped overseas. And nobody knows about that. While
that's the plan. You know, whether that happens or not is, you know, still remains to be seen. The natural gas market is really tanking, if you excuse the pun, right now, and they're projecting in the future. Now maybe they think, you know, 10 years from now, when all these plants get online, that you know it'll be worth it. But the fracking process is highly controversial. It's very polluting, especially fresh water sources.
I would say it's crazy. It is totally crazy to be going on with this. I've heard that since the PQ government was elected in Quebec, they have banned fracking. They've stopped it.
Well, that's good news.
Yeah.
There are other jurisdictions too that are keeping it out and stopping it. And there's been a huge fight in New York State about getting into the Marcellus shale there because of the proximity to the drinking supply for a great part of the eastern seaboard that could be put at risk by this, you know. I mean,
and it's almost as if they don't care. Yeah, let's put at risk the drinking water of the eastern seaboard of the United States. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. Yeah. So they're doing it here in BC, in northern BC. They are fracking now. The work has started on a pipeline.
It's a Pacific Trails pipeline, yeah.
Pacific Trail pipeline. In complete secrecy. That's what really gets me is the Liberals won't talk about it. The NDP won't talk about it. Both of those parties support both the pipeline and the fracking.
And a lot of
media
environmentalists do as well. They support they support the run of rivers or ruin of rivers that would put hydroelectric, various sized hydroelectric facilities on all the viable creeks and rivers in the province, largely to generate electricity to do, as you say, you know, to run these liquefied plants. It requires a tremendous amount of energy to make this stuff. And then you're going to have super tankers running up and down the Douglas Channel that people have complained about already. This fjord is treacherous, and then you break into the Broken Islands there. I mean, it's a disaster just waiting to happen, and people are we're trying to stop it now, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. To me, that's an issue of democracy and media. You know, this thing is happening, nobody knows about it. It's just not right. We were talking earlier about the debate in the United States. The third Obama and Mitt Romney debate took place, I think, last night.
Yeah. It was a foreign. Well, I mean, it was ostensibly foreign policy, but really it was the Middle East. It was the main thrust of that debate. I mean, if you could. I mean, at least on paper it was. When you listen to it, they kind of strayed all over the place. But I mean, it showed the sort of state of corporate media today. You know, they could have spent as much time talking about hairstyles, and you know, horse races are in place of policy largely in these debates, and especially when it comes to foreign policy, nobody really wants to admit that the foreign policy is largely out of the hands of a president. It's determined by the people who pick the presidents, and I don't mean the people. You know.
Who do you mean?
Well, there's especially now, I mean, with the passage of the Citizens United bill in the U.S. last year, which allows for unlimited and unaccounted for amounts of money to be donated to candidates, it basically means that the people with the deep pockets are the ones that are choosing. You know, they're the kingmakers. The democracy, I mean, that was tattered since the Bush reign, starting with the 2000 debacle and 2004. Well, now there's really little remnants of it. I mean, and the Romney family even has financial connections with the people who are going to be running the voting machines now. So, I mean, you know, and as Stalin said, it doesn't, you know, matter, you know, who's voting. It matters who's counting the votes.
So, I mean, I agree with you that the state of democracy in the United States is disastrous. I don't think it's any better in Canada. And in fact, you can make the argument that in the last federal election, which gave a majority government to Stephen Harper, there was clearly a concerted effort to subvert the election with the robocalls and other things that happened. And yet, months and months have gone by, and is anybody doing anything about it? Are the RCMP, you know, you almost
there are
laugh.
investigations, you know, but they'll drag on forever, I expect. But we're seeing that the Harper government is following in close step with the Republicans in the states. Voter suppression, voter ID, these are all tactics to limit the vote, because the Republicans, and this is largely due to the influence of Karl Rove, they figured that, well, the fewer the number of voters, the better it is for them. So they try to get rid of poor voters. They try to get rid of voters of color. They try to get rid of elderly voters. They try to get rid of the student vote. You know, and these are all largely blue or Democratic votes. And they do this through a variety of ways, and we're seeing that being brought up to Canada now, most notably with the voter ID laws, as if, you know, it's been a big problem here. You know, as with the states, you know, voter fraud is almost unheard of. You know, Greg Palast, the great American reporter, does a lot of work on this. It's terrific. Greg, P-A-L-S-A-S-T, rather.
Yeah. We were going to talk a little bit about the Middle East as well.
Well, you know, Mitt Romney at this, you know, during the debates, he spelled out, you know, people are worried about Syria. When I started my radio show, it was Yugoslavia, and it was the same deal. You know, we were painted a picture of Milosevic as this monster that had to be done away with, and a coalition of the willing and so forth. Well, we've seen the same pattern over and over again now since that time, and Syria is merely the latest in this long line. Of course, the Syrian regime was used by the West to torture the Canadian Maharar, you know, and who knows how many others. I mean, they were doing duty for the empire until their usefulness ran out. And I think the biggest problem, and Romney spelled it out beautifully, he said, well, the big problem they have with Syria is that they're Iran's only friend. And so if Syria is destabilized, Iran has lost its only friend in the region. And it seems that, and now Lebanon as well seems to be teetering, where, of course, they resisted the Israeli invasion of 2006. You're seeing that country being destabilized as well, and it all seems like stair steps towards a grander war, finally, in Iran, one that's been pushed by Israel and the United States in various degrees for at least the last half a dozen years.
To me, the weirdest thing about what happened in both Libya, where a Canadian general, I believe, led the air force that bombed it,
Right.
and now in Syria, is that the concern seems to be that those governments are killing innocent civilians. And that concern is led by the U.S. media and the U.S. government, which has just finished killing innocent civilians in Iraq,
Yeah.
not by the tens of thousands, but by the hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
And yet now these same, you know, people who have they use depleted uranium weapons in those countries. I mean, they've done the most horrific things possible, and they're still doing it in Pakistan with the drones. And they tell us, oh, the Libyan government and now the Syrian government are killing innocent people, so we have to invade them. I mean, shouldn't we be invading the United States to stop them from doing what they've been doing?
You start, and I'll follow with the American invasion. Well, yeah, I mean, and Chomsky said, you know, Noam Chomsky, the brilliant linguist and political thinker from the States, you know, he says it's brilliant. The American propaganda model is absolutely brilliant. I mean, they can fight, I mean, war after war, they can bomb country after country after country. I mean, the count is something 36 or something countries that the United States has bombed since the Second War. You know, and not to mention overthrowing liberal democracies right, left, and center in this hemisphere and across the world. but still there's this idea that America is interested in freedom and democracy and liberty for all. You know, a government that throws 2 million of its own people into the streets with this phony bank failure, you know, they're trying to convince us that they care about householders in Syria, in Libya.
And it works. And it works. A lot
Well,
of
I guess it works to
people-
some
yeah,
degree,
to
but
some
they
extent.
pretend it works.
So
you
it's
know?
up to us then, it's up to all of us here in Canada to, you know, to think, when they tell us this, maybe don't believe them. Maybe they're not telling us the truth. Maybe there's another game at play here. And we've all got to have our eyes open, because now they're putting one border around Canada and the United States. Mr. Harper is doing this at this very moment. And that's something else we've got to keep our eyes on.
And you know, I was at the demo yesterday and talked to Elizabeth May, the Green Party of Canada leader and the only Green in the Parliament, and she was talking about FIPA, the Foreign Investment Protection Act, and this is what our government wants to protect. They want to protect foreign investors. They don't want to protect their own people. You know, they don't care about that. But this deal, ostensibly to be signed with China, unilaterally by Mr. Harper, who doesn't even plan to go into the House to talk about it.
Okay, and we'll be right back with the next part of our show. Thank you very much, Chris Cook.
My pleasure, Jack.
Welcome back to part 3 of Citizens Forum. Our last guest is John Farquharson. We're going to be talking about local issues in this last part of the show. And we're going to start off talking about the by-election that's coming up. People know that Denise Savoy, the NDP Member of Parliament in Victoria, has stepped down, or is stepping down, I don't even know. And there is going to be a by-election for that seat. Denise Savoy was incredibly popular, that's for sure. One of the few MPs, I think, in Canada to win her seat with more than 50% of the vote. I know you're involved a bit with the Liberal Party, so what's happening?
Yeah, we certainly have a tough fight on our hands. I'm involved in the Federal Liberal Riding Association, so we've got our campaign office up, and we have our candidate. And indeed, Denise was a splendid representative for the riding, did a great job, and unfortunately had to step down because of health reasons. But again, speaking with my Federal Liberal riding hat on, we're offering up a great candidate.
Who is it?
His name is Paul Somerville, and right now he's a prof up at the University of Victoria, has a background with the Royal Bank of Canada as an economist, has a PhD in international relations, has traveled a lot, seen a lot of the world, so he really brings a wonderful global perspective to bear.
Personally, I'm
on our
looking for
riding.
somebody who's going to bring democracy to bear. And you know, that's the person I'll vote for. I don't know if any of them have any interest in democracy, but if they do, that's what I want to hear.
Yeah, Paul's a big fan of democracy, and hopefully that issue will come up in the election. I mean, it's interesting, Jack, to sort of survey people and find out what's top of mind. And you get the traditional, you know, environment, the economy, healthcare, and so on. And unfortunately, very unfortunately, democracy doesn't come up very much.
Well, I think democracy never comes up because it never gets a mention. You know, why would people think about it when you can, you know, I mean, it's the media that makes things happen in a lot of ways in our society. Democracy is never mentioned, I don't think, in the media, except maybe on this show, too much.
It's coming out a lot more now under Harper, because Harper is shredding our democracy. He puts through these 500, 600, 700-page omnibus bills and just forces them through. So there's no committee that is allowed to bring in expert witness and discuss a specific item. He rolls them all into one big omnibus bill, pushes it through. I mean, all we get in terms of communication from him is, you know, a lot of propaganda. I mean, his communications budget is through the roof. And so those are two assaults on democracy as far as I'm concerned.
And we really shouldn't let him get away with it. It is extremely dangerous for the future of all of us to allow Stephen Harper to, I mean, our democracy is weak and failing anyways, but he's just taken it that next step. And really the danger to us is immense. And I think there's nothing any of us can do that's more important than to focus on rebuilding our democracy. So I hope the federal candidate here, Paul Somerville, is going to, and I would hope they would all do it. I mean, just, to me, there's nothing more important. The will of the people has got to start to shine through. And for Stephen Harper, Chris Cook, our last guest, just talked about this trade agreement or deal that's being signed with China now. Nobody even knows about it. And Harper goes around the world signing free trade deals. Of course, the Liberal Party maybe wasn't much better in their day. I don't know.
Well, I mean, if you want to look at history, I'm not going to be much there in terms of my memory isn't that great. But I agree, the Chinese deal, the free trade deal that Harper is currently striking up with China, nobody knows anything about it. Has it been brought up, for public scrutiny? No.
Yeah. It's too dangerous to us to let it go ahead. But I do know that Paul Somerville is opposed to sewage treatment, and that's another big issue, a big local issue here in Victoria, I hope.
It is
a big issue with money. It's
certainly,
$1 billion.
It's $1 billion. Paul is opposed to this particular project, and he's not opposed to sewage treatment per se, but this particular project has absolutely no credibility with respect to scientific evidence or the support of public health officials.
I used to support sewage treatment because I just thought it's something we have to do. But in the last year or so, mainly because of what some people who I respect told me about the environmental end of it, I am really coming to the conclusion that we may be one of the few cities in the world where the natural process, because we seem to have cold water and a lot of tidal action, it's really less environmentally damaging to do that than to actually build a treatment plant, bring it all onto land and try to deal with it here. I mean, if we were, like many Canadian cities, on a river and you're dumping your sewage into the river, it's another story.
Right.
But this is different, and
it's very different, and we have, like you say, unique features that allow us to, fortunately, take care of our sewage in a very, very efficient, environmentally sound way without spending, like I say, $1 billion on a land-based treatment. And the issue, Mr. Floaty, you're familiar with Mr. Floaty?
I remember him.
Okay, exactly. You look at the expression on your face, that's the problem. And many folks, including Mr. Floaty, make a very emotionally compelling argument for sewage. But when you put the emotions to one side, when you put the yuck factor to one side and begin to look at the science isn't there to support your initial emotional reaction. It just isn't there.
Okay, so, and I've heard that from quite a few other people. And I think it really bears repeating that the science seems to say that there is very minimal environmental damage being caused by what we're doing, which is essentially sending our untreated sewage out into the strait. It's just, that's our situation. Maybe we're very, very lucky to have it. But again, I think you will reiterate that that's what the science says.
The science says that what we're doing right now is environmentally sound. I say that with some provision. The provision is that we have to stop putting in certain elements, such as mercury, heavy metals, the pharmaceuticals,
but and the chemicals.
The chemicals. But if you want to, address that issue in the most cost-effective way possible, you extract them at source. And Victoria has done made great progress in removing a lot of, hazardous material and chemicals at source.
I didn't know that. I'm glad to hear it.
Well, they have things like, grease traps in restaurants and, disposal sites for, hazardous material and that sort of thing. So they're doing a really good job. So the idea seems to be to continue on at, again, treating these things, keeping them out of the system in the first place.
Now, the cost of this is something that Mr. Somerville has talked about, because he's saying if we spend close to $1 billion on this project, it's $1 billion we don't have to spend on other things that we may need more. I think that makes sense too. And even let's spend a little bit of that $1 billion on removal of chemicals,
Sure.
et cetera, from the intake, and we just avoid the problem. What do you think is going to happen? I don't mean in the election, but with sewage treatment.
The sewage treatment, it's a tough one because it's emotionally compelling.
What do people think? Has there been any polling done in the city?
It shows up in terms of polling as being an issue, but as things get closer to actually going to tender and committing to $800 million plus $300, $400, $500, $600 per household for some indefinite period after that, and with all of the cost overruns on a mega project being borne by the citizens.
Plus the operating costs every year.
Well, the operating costs, like I say, the $300, $400, $500 per household. But it's the notion of, one of the things is the notion of the taxpayers being on the hook for cost overruns. And I'm really hard pressed to identify the last large infrastructure project that came in on budget.
That's right, because the province has said they'll put up a third, the feds are going to put up a third, we're putting up a third, but that's of a fixed price. If there's an overrun, it's us here who are, that's very interesting, and a bit scary because we know what can happen.
Yeah, it's scary, it's irresponsible.
So, but if people are polled on this specific issue, is there support for sewage treatment or not?
Again, from what I've heard, it's 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Okay, 1/3 say don't do anything. 1/3 say this is the way to go, and another third say that we have to do something, but this isn't the way to go. There's a more cost-effective, more scientifically sound approach to dealing with our sewage issues.
Yeah, tough question, eh? I mean,
Tough
I just
question.
hope we end up doing the right thing. What are some of the other issues in the by-election? Once again, there's a federal by-election coming up. When?
It's November 27th, so the writ was dropped on Sunday.
In Victoria to replace Denise Savoy.
Yeah, and there's two other by-elections being held across Canada at the same time.
Well, let's move on. We've talked a little bit about sewage treatment. We've talked a little bit about the by-election, amalgamation, the Blue Bridge. Where do you want to go?
Well, I mean, I know I've watched you enough, Jack, to know that democracy is a very, very a subject that's near and dear to your heart, as with myself. And another example of our democracy being under assault isn't just at the federal government level under Harper. It's right here in Victoria, where you have this freedom of information challenge being thrown out to very hardworking journalists who are attempting to, again, bring to the public's scrutiny information that we have paid for as taxpayers and we are entitled to.
As citizens.
As citizens, we're entitled to it. It's our information.
So you're talking about the Blue Bridge now?
I'm talking about the recent attempt by the city to shut down Focus magazine and one of their writers.
Not give them information.
Not give them information, say that, and then accuse them, impute, to go so far as to say the reason they're asking for this information is to somehow, systematically, besmirch the good reputation of the Johnson Street Bridge replacement project. It's one thing to say, in a sort of judicial manner, say, I, being on the other side receiving this FOI request, deem that this is not in the public's interest. Fair enough, that's part of their job. But to go a step further and then impute motives as to why these people are doing this, I mean, it's reprehensible. It's totally irresponsible.
I think the Johnson Street Bridge issue is huge. I think our city council has, Victoria City Council has not acted democratically. I would use that word. I mean, it seems like they were convinced that we need a new bridge, and then they used our own money in advertising, et cetera, to convince the people that we need a new bridge, and they were successful, so now
they have
away we go. The staff has been, city staff has been, really a big part of this whole thing that's moving along. I think it's absolutely the wrong way to be going. I would have been happy with the under $10 million repair, and I think most people would have been if we weren't fed this story that was quite different, I think, from what was actually going on.
Yeah, again, it's that control of information, and the city spends a lot of money on public relations and spin. And so, which is something that makes me quite cranky when they take my money to sell themselves and what they're doing, to sell themselves to me as a taxpayer, as a citizen, rather than just making available to interested journalists or interested citizens. Here are the decisions that are being made, here's who's making them, and here's the information that they're being made on. Make that available. I appreciate there are some, restraints there. I have no problem with that. But there's just so much information that's just not being made available to the public.
John, I'm afraid we're out of time. Thank you very much for
Well, thank you for
coming
having me,
down.
Jack, on your inaugural show, and certainly hats off to the new digs.
Yeah. So thanks very much for watching, ladies and gentlemen. This has been the first edition of Citizens Forum. I hope there'll be at least a few to come. If you're interested in telling us what you think or telling me what you think, my email address is jetkino@yahoo.ca. Once again, jetkino@yahoo.ca. Thank you very much, and goodbye.